What would you do if a wild animal showed up in your backyard, begging for help? Emily, a schoolteacher in Montana, finds a starving bobcat with a heartbreaking secret: 3 tiny cubs needing rescue. What she does next will amaze you. Comment where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. This is a story you won't forget. Emily Parker, a dedicated school teacher in her late 30s, cherished the simplicity of her life in Bozeman, Montana. Her suburban home was modest but inviting, with a backyard that stretched into untamed land dotted with golden grasses and towering pines. It was a perfect balance of civilization and nature, a retreat she had chosen to escape the chaos of urban living. One crisp autumn evening, as the setting sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Emily stood at her kitchen sink, rinsing dishes. Her eyes wandered to the backyard, where shadows danced in the fading light. Suddenly, something unusual caught her attention: a flash of movement near the edge of her property. She leaned closer to the window, narrowing her gaze. At first, she thought it was a stray dog, but as the creature stepped further into the open, Emily's breath caught. It was a bobcat, thin, frail, and unlike anything she had ever seen before. Its golden eyes locked onto hers through the glass, filled with an expression she could only describe as pleading. The animal's ribs jutted beneath its patchy fur, and its movements were slow and deliberate, as if every step required immense effort. Heart-pounding, Emily whispered to herself, "What are you doing here, little one?" She had heard of bobcats occasionally venturing near the outskirts of Bozeman, but to see one in such a vulnerable state was rare. Instinctively, she reached for her phone to take a photo but stopped. Instead, she quietly stepped away from the window, not wanting to frighten the animal. Emily's mind raced. Should she call animal control? The thought of the bobcat being tranquilized or removed unsettled her. Maybe it was just passing through, but something about the way it lingered, its gaze unwavering, suggested otherwise. She opened her back door cautiously, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. "Hey there," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The bobcat flinched but didn't run. Emily crouched, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The bobcat's ears twitched, and it let out a faint, rasping sound. A noise that wasn't quite a growl but carried a note of distress. Emily's heart ached. The creature wasn't just lost. It was desperate. Scanning her kitchen, she grabbed a shallow bowl and filled it with water. Stepping onto the porch, she placed it a few feet from the door and retreated inside. Through the glass, she watched as the bobcat hesitated before cautiously approaching the bowl. Its movements were jerky, as if pain or exhaustion made even the simplest action a struggle. Emily couldn't tear her eyes away as the bobcat lapped at the water. For the first time, she noticed the finer details: the dark tufts on its ears, the subtle spots on its tawny coat, and the way its tail flicked nervously. She whispered to herself, "You're beautiful, and you look like you need help." The bobcat finished drinking and stared at the door again. Emily held her breath, her pulse quickening. What was it trying to tell her? It let out another faint noise, then turned slowly, limping toward the edge of her yard. For a moment, she thought it would disappear into the wild brush, but it stopped and looked back over its shoulder. It was as if the bobcat was asking her to follow. Emily hesitated, her practical side screaming that this was a wild animal and not a pet in need of rescuing. But her gut told her something different. Grabbing a flashlight, she stepped outside, careful not to make sudden movements. The bobcat didn't flee. Instead, it took a few steps forward, then paused, glancing back to ensure Emily was coming. As she followed the frail creature into the shadows of the overgrown lot behind her house, Emily felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. This wasn't just an encounter with wildlife. It was the beginning of something much bigger. She had no idea where the bobcat was leading her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it needed her just as much as she needed to understand why it had chosen her backyard. Emily trailed behind the bobcat cautiously, her flashlight cutting through the encroaching darkness. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of dry leaves and the faint, earthy aroma of distant pine. Each step felt deliberate, her boots crunching softly against the brittle undergrowth. The bobcat moved with effort, its limp growing more pronounced as it guided her further from her yard and into the overgrown lot at the edge of her neighborhood. "Where are you taking me?" Emily murmured, half to herself and half to the animal. It felt surreal, a creature of the wild leading her as if it understood she could help. The lot was an eyesore for most residents, a patch of land long abandoned, strewn with discarded tires, rusted appliances, and tangled weeds that grew taller than an average person. Many in the community had petitioned to clean it up, but no progress had been made. It wasn't a place Emily ventured often, but tonight, it seemed to hold secrets. The bobcat stopped abruptly, its ears flicking back toward Emily. It let out a soft whining sound, barely audible over the rustle of the leaves. Emily lowered her flashlight beam to avoid startling the creature and crouched slightly, trying to make herself appear less imposing. "Okay," she said softly. "I'm here." "What now?" The bobcat hesitated before limping forward again, this time toward a rusted truck bed partially hidden by wild brambles. Emily noticed the way it slowed its movements, as though nearing something precious. She followed closely, her flashlight casting shadows over the truck's peeling paint and broken windows. Then she heard it, a faint, high-pitched mewing sound coming from beneath the truck. Emily's heart clenched. "Oh my God," she whispered, stepping closer. Peering under the truck, she saw them. 3 tiny bobcat cubs, huddled together in a shallow nest made of dried grass and scraps of fabric. Their fur was patchy, their eyes barely open, and they looked too small to be on their own. The mother bobcat, which Emily had started calling Bella in her mind, lowered herself beside the cubs, nuzzling each one with gentle affection. Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. Bella wasn't just desperate for herself. She was fighting to keep her babies alive. Emily sat down cross-legged a few feet away, careful to keep her movements slow. "You're a mom," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "You brought me here for them, didn't you?" Bella turned her head, her golden eyes meeting Emily's for a brief moment before returning to her cubs. Emily could feel the weight of the trust Bella was placing in her. A wild animal, driven by sheer instinct, asking for help in the only way it knew how. For a few moments, Emily simply watched, letting Bella settle the cubs. She knew the lot wasn't safe. The area was littered with debris, and the cold Montana nights were only going to get harsher. But she also knew Bella was a wild animal, not a pet. Intervening too much could harm more than help. "Okay," Emily said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. "First things first. You need food and water." She backed away slowly, not wanting to spook Bella, and returned home. Grabbing a bowl of fresh water and some leftover cooked chicken, she hurried back to the lot. Placing the food a safe distance from the truck, she stepped back to watch. Bella sniffed the air cautiously before approaching the food. She nudged the bowl with her nose, her body tense as if expecting a trap. After a few moments, hunger won out, and she began to eat. Emily stayed quiet, her heart swelling with relief as Bella seemed to accept her offering. The cubs, curious but hesitant, peeked out from their makeshift nest. Their tiny faces were a mixture of wonder and caution, their soft mews filling the chilly night air. Emily couldn't help but smile. "You're beautiful, all of you," she whispered, "and you're going to be okay. I'll make sure of it." As Bella finished eating and returned to her cubs, Emily realized she had a decision to make. The lot wasn't a place for a mother and her babies. Yet, Bella's wild nature meant she couldn't simply scoop them up and take them inside. She needed a plan, one that would protect the bobcat family without taking away what little freedom they had left. For now, Emily resolved to help them survive, one step at a time. She stood, brushing dirt from her jeans, and took one last look at the cubs before heading home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she had taken the first step towards something extraordinary. The next morning, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Bella and her cubs. While she went about her usual routine, grading papers, preparing lesson plans, and tidying up the house, her thoughts kept drifting back to the fragile family nestled under the rusted truck. The memory of Bella's golden eyes, filled with both desperation and trust, lingered in her mind like an unspoken plea. By mid-afternoon, Emily decided she needed to check on them. Carrying a small backpack filled with supplies, fresh water, leftover chicken, and a blanket she no longer used, she headed back to the lot. The sun was high in the sky, casting warm light over the wild grasses and debris-strewn ground. When Emily arrived at the rusted truck, she crouched a safe distance away and waited. Bella was there, her slender frame curled protectively around her cubs. At first, Bella tensed at Emily's presence, her ears flattening and her body low to the ground. But Emily didn't move closer. She simply sat, placing the bowl of water and food in the same spot as the night before. "Hey, Bella," she said softly, her voice steady and calm. "It's just me. I brought you something." Bella's nose twitched, her eyes flickering between the food and Emily. After a few moments, the mother bobcat rose cautiously and padded toward the bowl. Her limp was more noticeable in the daylight, each step heavy with exhaustion. She sniffed the chicken, nudged it with her nose, and began to eat. Emily stayed perfectly still, her heart aching as she watched Bella eat with ravenous hunger. The cubs stirred beneath the truck, their tiny heads poking out from their makeshift nest. There were 3 of them, small, fragile bundles of fur that looked barely old enough to survive on their own. Emily's chest tightened as she took in their delicate features. Their large ears, their soft, downy coats, and the way their tiny tails twitched nervously. "Hi there, little ones," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're so tiny." One of the cubs, bolder than the others, took a shaky step forward, its round eyes locked on Emily. Its legs wobbled as it moved, but curiosity seemed to outweigh its fear. Bella noticed and let out a low, protective growl, her gaze darting between Emily and her adventurous cub. Emily raised her hands in a gesture of surrender. "It's okay, Bella. I'm not going to hurt them," she said gently. "I promise." The bold cub stopped a few feet from Emily, its small nose twitching as it sniffed the air. The other 2 cubs stayed close to their mother, peeking out from the safety of the nest. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with a mix of awe and sadness. These cubs were so vulnerable, so unaware of the dangers that surrounded them. She studied them carefully, trying to assess their condition. They were thin, their ribs faintly visible beneath their fur. One of the cubs, the smallest, seemed especially weak, its movements slow and unsteady. Emily's mind raced with questions. How long had Bella been struggling to keep them alive? What had driven her to venture so close to human habitation? And most importantly, how could Emily help without doing more harm than good? "You're doing your best, aren't you, Bella?" Emily said softly, her eyes meeting the mother bobcats. "But this place, it's not safe for them." The lot was filled with hazards, shards of glass, rusted metal, and scattered debris that could easily harm the cubs. And with colder nights approaching, the thin shelter of the truck wouldn't be enough to keep them warm. Emily knew she had to act, but she also understood the delicate balance of dealing with a wild animal. Any misstep could endanger Bella and her cubs, or cause them to abandon the area altogether. "I'll figure something out," Emily murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "I'll help you." As Bella finished eating and returned to her cubs, Emily carefully unfolded the blanket she had brought and laid it a few feet away from the truck. It wasn't much, but it might provide some extra warmth or padding for the fragile cubs. She stepped back, watching as Bella sniffed the blanket warily before settling down with her babies. For a moment, Emily stood in silence, taking in the scene. Bella's golden eyes, now softer and less guarded, met hers. There was no denying the connection between them, an unspoken understanding that Emily was there to help. As she walked back home, Emily's resolve solidified. She couldn't abandon Bella and her cubs to the dangers of the lot. Whatever it took, she would find a way to protect them. Over the next few days, Emily found herself torn between conflicting emotions: wonder at the bond she was forming with Bella and her cubs, and fear for their safety. The lot, with its rusting metal and scattered debris, wasn't just an inconvenient home for the bobcat family. It was dangerous. Broken glass glittered in the sunlight, jagged and waiting. The rusted truck they sheltered under offered little protection against the coming Montana winter. But what could she do? They were wild animals, and her instincts told her that interfering too much might do more harm than good. On a chilly Thursday morning, Emily sat at her kitchen table, sipping coffee and staring at the overgrown field behind her home. The sun cast long shadows across the lot, illuminating Bella as she prowled carefully around the truck, her cubs nestled beneath it. Emily sighed, her chest tightening with worry. She couldn't stop replaying the image of the smallest cub, weak and struggling, its tiny body too frail for the harsh conditions. Her phone buzzed, jolting her from her thoughts. It was a text from her friend Rachel, who worked as a veterinary technician at the local animal clinic. Rachel, so, how's your secret wildlife rescue mission going? Emily smiled faintly, typing back, not great. I feel like I'm in over my head. I don't know what to do for them without messing everything up. The reply came quickly, you're doing what you can. If they're eating and staying safe, that's a win. But you might need backup soon. Backup? The word lingered in Emily's mind. She didn't know much about wildlife rescue, but she knew Bella and her cubs couldn't stay in the lot forever. The cubs would need a safer environment to grow, and Bella deserved a chance to recover without the constant threat of starvation or predators. By late afternoon, Emily had made up her mind to visit the lot again. She packed her now standard supplies, water, cooked chicken, and the fleece blanket she brought the day before, and ventured out. The autumn wind bit at her cheeks as she crossed into the lot, her boots crunching over dry leaves and loose gravel. Bella greeted her with cautious familiarity, her golden eyes narrowing slightly but lacking the sharp distrust they'd held during their first encounters. She stood protectively in front of the truck, her ears twitching as Emily approached. "Hi, Bella," Emily said softly, crouching a safe distance away. She set the bowl of water and chicken on the ground, then slowly slid the blanket closer to the truck. "How are the little ones today?" The cubs were still huddled beneath the truck, their small, furry bodies pressed together for warmth. The smallest one, whom Emily had started calling Lily in her mind, let out a soft mew that tugged at her heart. The others, bigger and slightly more energetic, watched her with wide, curious eyes. Bella began to eat, her movements slow and deliberate. Emily stayed where she was, watching the mother bobcat and her cubs in silence. The bond between them was clear, but so was the strain. Bella's limp was more pronounced now, her body clearly weakened from hunger and exhaustion. The cubs, though resilient, wouldn't survive much longer in such a harsh environment. "I can't leave you here," Emily murmured, almost to herself. "This isn't safe." Her words hung in the air, met only by the sound of Bella chewing and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Emily felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She couldn't simply move the bobcats into her home. They were wild animals, and Bella's instinct to protect her cubs might make her dangerous if cornered. But leaving them in the lot felt like abandoning them to a slow, inevitable fate. That evening, Emily called Rachel. "I need advice," she said, pacing her living room. "There's a wildlife sanctuary in Colorado that I've heard about. They specialize in rehabilitating bobcats and rewilding them. Do you think that's an option?" Rachel hesitated. "It could be, but you'd need to get Bella and her cubs safely contained first. That's tricky. Wild animals don't always cooperate, even when you're trying to help." "I know," Emily said, her voice thick with frustration, "but I can't just leave them there. The lot is dangerous, and winter's coming. I don't think they'll survive." Rachel sighed on the other end of the line. "Okay, let's think this through. Maybe start by building some kind of temporary shelter for them. Something safer than the truck, but not so intrusive that Bella feels threatened. That'll buy you time to figure out the next step." Emily nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'll do it. Thanks, Rachel." As she hung up, Emily's mind raced with ideas. Tomorrow, she would begin creating a temporary safe haven for Bella and her cubs. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would be better than the lot. And with any luck, it would give her the time she needed to contact the sanctuary and plan their relocation. For now, though, all she could do was hope and act. The next morning, Emily rose early, determined to take the first tangible steps toward helping Bella and her cubs. Her plan was simple: build a temporary shelter close to the truck where Bella and the cubs could find safety and warmth. It wasn't a long-term solution, but it would protect them from the biting cold nights and dangerous debris scattered across the lot. Emily drove to the local hardware store, her heart pounding with nervous energy. She wasn't sure what she needed: so she grabbed a few wooden pallets, chicken wire, a tarp, and a hammer with some nails. As she loaded everything into the back of her truck, an older gentleman at the store raised an eyebrow. "Building something?" he asked casually. Yeah," Emily replied, hesitating. "For some stray animals." The man chuckled. "Stray animals or something wilder?" Emily gave him a small smile. "A little of both." He tipped his hat. "Good luck with that. Wild ones can be stubborn." Stubborn was an understatement, Emily thought as she pulled into the lot behind her house. Bella was already watching her from a distance. Her golden eyes narrowed in suspicion. The cubs were tucked under the truck, their small heads occasionally poking out to observe their surroundings. Emily began her work slowly, trying not to spook Bella. She set up the pallets in a rectangular formation a few yards away from the truck, carefully nailing them together to create a stable frame. She draped the tarp over the top and sides, leaving one end open for Bella to enter if she chose. Then she lined the floor with straw and an old blanket she didn't mind parting with. All the while, Bella watched, her ears flicking with every sound of the hammer. She didn't growl or move aggressively, but her body language was tense, ready to bolt at the slightest threat. "Okay," Emily said aloud, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This isn't the Ritz, but it's better than that truck." She stepped back to admire her work. The makeshift shelter wasn't pretty, but it was sturdy, warm, and much safer than the exposed, debris-ridden ground beneath the truck. Emily set down a bowl of water and some chicken near the entrance, then retreated to her usual spot a few feet away. Bella hesitated, her sharp eyes darting between Emily and the new structure. The cubs, curious as ever, mewed softly and crawled out from their nest. One of them, the boldest, approached the shelter and sniffed at the entrance. Bella growled low in her throat, and the cub froze. "It's okay," Emily said softly, as if Bella could understand her words. "I built it for you." After what felt like an eternity, Bella took a cautious step toward the shelter. Her movements were slow, deliberate, as though testing the ground for traps. She sniffed the air, then the edge of the tarp. Finally, she stepped inside, her cubs following closely behind. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Bella didn't stay long. Just a few minutes to explore the space and nudge the straw with her nose, but it was a start. When she emerged, her eyes met Emily's. There was still suspicion, but also a flicker of something else. Trust. Over the next few days, Emily continued to visit the lot with food and water, sitting quietly by the shelter while Bella and her cubs grew more comfortable with her presence. She named the cubs in her head: Max, the bold leader; Cooper, the playful troublemaker; and Lily, the smallest and quietest of the trio. Watching them explore the shelter and play in the straw brought Emily a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. One morning, as Emily sat cross-legged a few feet from the shelter, Bella did something that left her speechless. The mother bobcat approached her slowly, carrying a small piece of raw meat in her jaws. She dropped it at Emily's feet, then backed away, her eyes steady and unblinking. Emily's chest tightened with emotion. "You're thanking me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't believe it." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes as she stared at the offering. The gesture was small but profound, a moment of trust between a wild animal and a human. Emily knew then that she had made the right decision to help Bella and her cubs. As the days passed, the bond between them grew stronger. Bella began to linger outside the shelter even when Emily was nearby, her body language more relaxed. The cubs, ever curious, ventured closer to Emily, their tiny paws patting softly on the ground. The makeshift shelter had become a lifeline for the bobcat family, but Emily knew it wasn't a permanent solution. Winter was creeping closer, and the lot was no place for a mother and her cubs to thrive. It was time to start planning their future, a safer, brighter future that would ensure their survival. Emily stood at the edge of the lot, surveying her progress. The makeshift shelter she built was holding up well, but the surrounding area still posed a significant threat to Bella and her cubs. Shards of glass glittered among the weeds, jagged scraps of metal peeked out from piles of debris, and the rusted truck loomed precariously, its broken frame far from secure. It wasn't enough to have a single safe spot. She needed to transform the environment into a space that wouldn't constantly endanger the bobcat family. Armed with gloves, a rake, and a trash bag, Emily began the laborious task of clearing the lot. Each step revealed new hazards: tangled wires, rusted nails, and crumbling wood. She worked steadily, her breath fogging in the crisp Montana air. Bella watched from the shelter, her golden eyes tracking Emily's every move. The cubs occasionally peeked out, their tiny faces curious but cautious. "Don't mind me," Emily said, her voice light despite the weight of her task. "I'm just cleaning up your neighborhood." The hours passed, and Emily's pile of trash bags grew larger. She worked methodically, ensuring every dangerous object she found was removed. By midday, her hands ached and her muscles protested, but she felt a sense of accomplishment. The lot wasn't perfect, but it was significantly safer. As she paused to catch her breath, a familiar voice called out from behind her. "Emily, what on earth are you doing out here?" She turned to see Rachel, her friend and the veterinary technician, standing at the edge of the lot. Rachel's auburn hair was tucked under a knit cap, and her arms were crossed as she eyed the growing pile of debris. "Cleaning up," Emily replied, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. This place was a death trap. Rachel approached cautiously, her gaze shifting to the shelter and the movement inside. "Are those bobcats?" Emily confirmed, smiling faintly. "A mom and her 3 cubs. I've been helping them." Rachel let out a low whistle. "You've got guts. And maybe a death wish. Wild animals aren't exactly cuddly." "I know," Emily said, her tone serious. "But they're in trouble, Rachel. Bella, she's the mom, was starving when she showed up. The cubs are barely surviving. I couldn't just ignore them." Rachel sighed, her expression softening. "Well, it's not exactly standard protocol, but I get it. What's your plan?" Emily gestured to the shelter. "I'm making this place safer for now, but I want to get them to a wildlife sanctuary. There's one in Colorado that specializes in bobcats." Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea, but it's going to take a lot to get them there. Have you called the sanctuary yet?" "Not yet," Emily admitted. "I wanted to make sure they were stable first. Bella's starting to trust me, but I don't want to push too hard." Rachel glanced at the shelter, where Bella was nuzzling one of her cubs. "You're doing the right thing, but you'll need help when it's time to move them. Bobcats are strong, even when they're weak. You might need a professional trapper to assist." Emily's stomach tightened at the thought. "I'll figure it out. For now, I just want them to feel safe." Rachel placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "You're amazing. You know that? Not many people would do this." Emily smiled, her chest swelling with gratitude. "Thanks, Rachel. That means a lot." The 2 women spent the next few hours working together, clearing more debris and reinforcing the shelter. Rachel inspected the cubs from a distance, her trained eye assessing their condition. "They look better than I expected," she said. "Bella's doing her best, but you've made a big difference." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the lot in golden light, Emily stood back and surveyed their work. The area was cleaner, safer, and more secure. Bella had watched the entire process from the shelter, her body language more relaxed than Emily had ever seen. Rachel dusted off her hands. "This is a good start. Call me if you need anything. And seriously, think about contacting that sanctuary sooner rather than later." "I will," Emily promised. "Thanks for your help today." As Rachel left, Emily returned to the shelter with fresh food and water. Bella met her gaze, her golden eyes calm and steady. For the first time, Emily felt a sense of hope. She knelt a few feet from the shelter and spoke softly. "This isn't forever," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I promise I'll find you a real home. Somewhere safe." Bella didn't respond, of course, but her quiet presence was enough. Emily sat there for a long time, watching the cubs play in the fading light and listening to the soft rustle of the wind through the grass. For now, they were safe. And that was enough. The following morning, Emily returned to the lot with her usual supplies: water, food, and a sense of quiet anticipation. She had noticed a subtle shift in Bella's behavior over the past few days. The once fearful bobcat now watched her without the tension and guarded movements that had marked their early encounters. Emily couldn't deny the connection forming between them, an unspoken understanding that went beyond words. As she approached the shelter, Bella stepped out, her golden eyes meeting Emily's. The cubs followed close behind, tumbling over each other as they explored the area. Emily crouched a safe distance away, setting down the bowl of chicken and water. She smiled as Max, the boldest of the cubs, darted forward to sniff the offerings. "Morning, little ones," she murmured, her voice gentle. "You're getting braver every day." Emily watched as Bella guided her cubs back toward the shelter. Her maternal instincts were sharp, every movement purposeful as she nudged the smaller ones closer to safety. Lily, the smallest and most cautious cub, stuck close to Bella's side, her tiny body dwarfed by her siblings. Emily's heart swelled as she observed their interactions. It was a reminder of how fiercely Bella was fighting to protect her family. Emily shifted slightly to get a better look, and Bella suddenly moved toward her, carrying something in her jaws. Emily froze, her pulse quickening. The mother bobcat stopped a few feet away and dropped the item, a small, raw piece of meat, at Emily's feet. For a moment, Emily couldn't breathe. The gesture was so unexpected, so deeply symbolic, that it left her stunned. Bella backed up a few steps, her gaze steady and deliberate. She wasn't leaving, nor was she showing any signs of fear or aggression. It was as though she was saying, "You've helped me. Now I'm offering something in return." Emily's voice wavered as she whispered, "You're thanking me, aren't you?" Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. The piece of meat, likely scavenged from Bella's limited resources, wasn't just food. It was a profound act of trust and gratitude from a wild animal that had every reason to avoid humans. Emily carefully picked up the meat and placed it beside the shelter. "Thank you, Bella," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't deserve this, but thank you." The moment hung in the air, fragile and extraordinary. Bella seemed satisfied, retreating to her cubs and settling down near the shelter's entrance. Emily stayed where she was, her hands trembling as she processed what had just happened. Over the next hour, Emily remained at the lot, watching the cubs play while Bella rested. The playful energy of Max, Cooper, and Lily brought a rare lightness to the day. Max chased a falling leaf, his tiny paws batting at it with determination. Cooper pounced on his brother, tumbling them both into a patch of straw. Lily, quieter and more reserved, observed her siblings from a safe distance, her bright eyes scanning the area. Emily couldn't help but smile. "You've got your hands full, Bella," she said softly, "but you're doing an incredible job." As the sun began to climb higher in the sky, Emily knew it was time to leave. She gathered her things and stood, her eyes lingering on the bobcat family. Bella watched her go, her gaze calm and steady, as though acknowledging Emily's presence as a part of their lives now. That evening, Emily called Rachel to share the story. "She brought me food, Rachel," Emily said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "She actually brought me food. Can you imagine that?" Rachel's laugh crackled over the phone. "That's incredible, Em. Wild animals don't do that unless they've decided you're part of their pack. Or, in this case, her clan." "It felt unreal," Emily admitted. "Like she was telling me she trusts me." "Well, you've earned it," Rachel replied. "But that also means she's relying on you now. You've got to follow through." Emily nodded, even though Rachel couldn't see her. "I will. I'm calling the sanctuary tomorrow. It's time to take the next step." After hanging up, Emily sat in the quiet of her living room, the weight of her commitment settling over her. Bella's gesture of trust wasn't just a moment of connection. It was a responsibility. The bobcat had placed her faith in Emily, and Emily was determined not to let her down. In the days that followed Bella's extraordinary gesture, Emily felt an even deeper sense of responsibility for the bobcat family. The bond between them continued to grow, marked by small but significant moments of trust. Bella no longer bristled at Emily's presence, and the cubs began to view her as less of a threat and more of a curious part of their world. The crisp Montana mornings were now Emily's favorite time of day. She would bring her supplies to the lot, water, food, and sometimes a few extra blankets, and sit quietly near the shelter, watching Bella and her cubs. Each one had begun to develop a distinct personality, and Emily found herself marveling at their individuality. Max, the boldest, was always the first to venture out of the shelter. His tawny coat gleamed in the sunlight as he pounced on leaves and stalked imaginary prey. He moved with a confidence that belied his small size, his tiny tail twitching with every calculated step. Cooper, on the other hand, was a mischievous ball of energy. He loved to wrestle with his siblings, often tumbling into Max and inciting playful scuffles. His antics made Emily laugh, a sound she hadn't realized she missed until it escaped her lips one frosty morning. And then there was Lily. The smallest of the trio, Lily was cautious and deliberate, always observing her brothers before joining their games. Her soft, golden-brown fur and wide eyes gave her an air of vulnerability, but Emily could see the spark of determination in her movements. Lily was a survivor, just like her mother. One afternoon, as Emily sat cross-legged near the shelter, the cubs decided to investigate her more closely. Max, as expected, was the first to approach. He sniffed at her boots, his tiny nose twitching with curiosity. Emily held perfectly still, her heart racing as the brave little cub came within inches of her outstretched hand. "Hey there, Max," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're fearless, aren't you?" Cooper followed shortly after, bounding over with his usual exuberance. He batted at a loose thread on Emily's jeans, his tiny claws catching the fabric. Emily chuckled softly, resisting the urge to reach out and touch him. She knew better than to cross that line, even as her heart swelled with affection. Lily stayed back, watching her brothers with wide eyes. Emily turned her head slightly, catching Lily's gaze. "It's okay," she murmured. "You can take your time." As if understanding her words, Lily crept forward, her movements slow and tentative. She stopped a few feet away, her ears twitching nervously. Emily didn't push her. Instead, she waited, letting Lily decide when she was ready. Bella observed the entire interaction from the entrance of the shelter. Her golden eyes were steady, her body relaxed. Emily wondered what the mother bobcat thought of all this. Her cubs playing near a human, her once fragile family thriving in a space Emily had helped create. "Your babies are amazing, Bella," Emily said softly, glancing toward the mother. "You've done such a good job with them." Bella blinked slowly, her gaze calm and unthreatened. Emily liked to think it was a sign of understanding, though she knew it might simply be the animal's way of acknowledging her presence. As the cubs grew more comfortable, Emily began to notice subtle changes in their behavior. They were more adventurous, exploring the edges of the lot and testing their limits under Bella's watchful eye. Max started to climb the lower branches of a nearby tree, his tiny claws digging into the bark as he pulled himself higher. Cooper followed, though his playful nature often got the better of him, resulting in clumsy tumbles back to the ground. Lily stayed closer to the shelter, her cautious nature keeping her safe. Watching them thrive filled Emily with a deep sense of joy, but it also reinforced the urgency of finding them a permanent solution. The lot was still no place for a bobcat family, especially with winter looming. She had been researching the sanctuary in Colorado and was now ready to make the call. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Emily sat on her porch with her phone in hand. Her fingers hovered over the number she had saved. She took a deep breath and pressed dial. "Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary, this is Sarah speaking. How can I help you?" A warm, professional voice answered. Emily hesitated for a moment before replying. "Hi, my name is Emily Parker. I'm in Montana, and I've been caring for a bobcat and her 3 cubs. They wandered into my backyard a few weeks ago, and I've been helping them survive. But they need more than I can give them." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "That's incredible," Sarah said, her voice filled with admiration. "Tell me everything." Emily recounted the story: the first sighting of Bella, the discovery of the cubs, and the makeshift shelter she had built. She explained how the family was growing stronger, but how the lot wasn't a sustainable environment for them. When she finished, Sarah's tone was reassuring. "You've done an amazing job, Emily. If you're willing to work with us, we can help. We specialize in rehabilitating wild bobcats and releasing them into safe, protected areas. It'll take some coordination, but we can guide you through the process." Relief washed over Emily like a wave. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want them to have a chance." As she ended the call, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. The sanctuary was willing to help, and she was one step closer to giving Bella and her cubs the future they deserved. The following morning, Emily felt a sense of renewed determination. With the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary now involved, the path forward felt clearer, though no less daunting. She knew the next few days would be crucial in preparing Bella and her cubs for their relocation. Emily had a follow-up call with Sarah from the sanctuary to finalize the details. Sarah explained that the process would involve setting up humane traps for Bella and her cubs, ensuring their safety during transportation. It was a delicate operation that required precision and patience. "Bobcats are fiercely protective of their young," Sarah said over the phone. "We'll guide you step by step, but you'll need to prepare for some resistance. Bella will likely be on edge." "I understand," Emily replied, her voice steady. "I just want to make sure it's done right." After the call, Emily spent hours researching wildlife traps and how to minimize stress for the animals. She drove to a local supply store and rented a set of large, sturdy traps designed specifically for wildcats. The clerk, a grizzled man with a kind smile, offered her some advice. "Patience is key," he said as he loaded the traps into her truck. "Set the traps with food that smells strong, like raw meat or fish. Leave them alone once they're in place. Don't hover or you'll spook them." "Got it," Emily said, nodding. "Thank you." Back at the lot, Emily carefully placed the traps near the shelter. She lined them with straw for comfort and added chunks of raw chicken as bait. Bella watched her from a distance, her golden eyes sharp and wary. Emily spoke softly as she worked, hoping to reassure the mother bobcat. "This is for you and your babies," she murmured. "I promise it's for the best." The cubs, oblivious to the tension, tumbled out of the shelter and began chasing each other through the tall grass. Emily smiled despite her nerves. Their playful innocence was a reminder of why she was doing this, to give them a chance to grow up in a safe, protected environment. That evening, as the traps sat untouched, Emily received a text from Rachel. "Rachel, need a hand tomorrow? I can come by." Emily hesitated for a moment before typing back, "Yes, please. Could use the extra support." The next morning, Rachel arrived with coffee and a determined look. "So, what's the game plan?" she asked, handing Emily a steaming cup. "We wait," Emily said, gesturing to the traps. "They're set, but Bella's been cautious. I don't want to rush her." Rachel peered toward the shelter, where Bella was lying just outside the entrance. "She's smart. She knows something's up." "Yeah," Emily replied, sighing. "I just hope she trusts me enough to go through with it." The two friends spent the day watching from a distance, careful not to disturb the traps. Bella approached them several times, sniffing the air and circling cautiously, but she didn't step inside. The cubs, however, were more curious. Max wandered close to one of the traps, his tiny nose twitching as he sniffed the chicken inside. Bella let out a low growl, and he quickly retreated. "She's not going to make this easy," Rachel said with a chuckle. "But honestly, I respect her for that." By late afternoon, Emily was starting to lose hope. The traps remained empty, and Bella seemed more watchful than ever. Emily turned to Rachel, her shoulders slumping. "What if this doesn't work?" "It will," Rachel said firmly. "These things take time. Bella's a mom. She's just being careful. But you've already earned her trust, and that's a big deal." As the sun began to set, Emily decided to give it one more day. She removed the bait from the traps for the night, not wanting to leave food unattended in the lot. Bella watched her movements closely, her cubs huddled together near the shelter. Before leaving, Emily crouched near the edge of the lot, her voice soft but resolute. "We're almost there, Bella. Just a little more trust. You're going to a place where you and your babies will be safe." That night, Emily hardly slept. Her mind raced with worry about the challenges ahead. What if Bella refused to enter the traps? What if the stress was too much for her or the cubs? But beneath the anxiety, there was hope, a flicker of faith that Bella and her cubs would soon have the life they deserved. The next morning, Emily returned to the lot with Rachel by her side. They reset the traps with fresh bait and settled in to wait once again. As the hours passed, Emily's heart pounded every time Bella moved closer to the traps. Finally, just before midday, Bella stepped inside one of them. Emily held her breath as the trap door gently closed behind Bella. The mother bobcat let out a low, guttural growl, her body tense with fear. Emily's chest tightened, but she reminded herself that this was for Bella's safety. The cubs, startled by the noise, darted back into the shelter. Emily and Rachel quickly but carefully secured the trap, ensuring Bella was safe and calm. "One down," Rachel said, her voice steady. "Now for the cubs." The capture of Bella marked the beginning of the final, bittersweet stage of Emily's mission. Securing the cubs proved to be equally delicate and nerve-wracking. The young bobcats, confused and frightened by their mother's sudden confinement, scattered around the shelter, their mews echoing through the lot. Emily's heart clenched with each sound, but she knew this was the only way to ensure their safety. Rachel crouched beside her, whispering, "They'll follow her scent. Let's give them time." Emily nodded, gripping the edge of the trap where Bella rested, her golden eyes wide and wild with uncertainty. "It's okay, Bella," Emily murmured. "Your babies will be with you soon." Over the next hour, one by one, the cubs cautiously ventured into the traps, lured by the scent of the food and the faint traces of Bella's presence. Max was the first, his bold nature driving him forward. Cooper followed soon after, his playful curiosity outweighing his fear. Lily, the smallest and most cautious, hesitated the longest, lingering near the shelter and crying softly for her mother. Emily's throat tightened as she watched Lily pace nervously. "Come on, sweetheart," she whispered. "You can do it." Finally, Lily stepped into the last trap, her tiny body trembling as the door closed behind her. Emily and Rachel sprang into action, securing the traps and ensuring the cubs were safe. Emily let out a long breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her hands shaking as she placed the traps near Bella's. "They're all together now," Rachel said, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "You did it." Emily nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "We did it." The drive to the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Sanctuary was both tense and quiet. The traps were secured in the back of Emily's truck, and she checked them at every stop to ensure Bella and her cubs were calm. Bella's growls had softened to quiet, wary huffs, and the cubs occasionally let out soft mews that broke Emily's heart. "You're doing the right thing," Rachel reminded her as they crossed into Colorado. "This is the start of a better life for them." When they arrived at the sanctuary, Emily was greeted by Sarah, the sanctuary coordinator she had spoken to on the phone. Sarah was a warm, confident woman with a calming presence that immediately put Emily at ease. Her team of wildlife specialists worked quickly but gently to transfer Bella and her cubs to a spacious, enclosed rehabilitation area designed to mimic their natural habitat. "They'll stay here until they're strong enough to be released," Sarah explained as they walked toward the enclosure. "Bella will teach her cubs how to hunt and survive, and when they're ready, we'll release them in a protected wilderness area." Emily nodded, her eyes welling with tears. She watched as Bella was released into the enclosure, her body tense but composed as she explored the new space. The cubs followed timidly, clinging close to their mother. Within minutes, Bella began to nuzzle and lick them, reassuring them with her presence. "They're going to be okay," Sarah said, smiling. "You gave them a chance, Emily." Standing at the edge of the enclosure, Emily felt a mix of pride and sadness. She had spent weeks caring for Bella and her cubs, and now it was time to let them go. She placed her hand on the enclosure's fence, her voice soft but steady. "Goodbye, Bella." "Max, Cooper, Lily. You're going to do amazing things out there." Bella turned for a brief moment, her golden eyes meeting Emily's through the fence. It was a fleeting glance, but it held a quiet acknowledgement, a final thread of trust between them. As Emily and Rachel drove back to Montana, the empty traps in the truck bed felt like both a loss and a victory. Emily knew she would miss Bella and her cubs, but she also felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had been a small part of their journey, a bridge between survival and freedom. In the weeks that followed, Sarah kept Emily updated on Bella's progress. The cubs grew stronger each day, playing and learning under their mother's watchful eye. Eventually, the family was released into a protected wilderness area, where they could thrive in their natural environment. For Emily, the experience was transformative. She spent more time outdoors, volunteering with local wildlife organizations, and educating others about the importance of compassion for all living things. Her backyard, once a simple patch of green, now felt like a portal to something greater, a reminder of the connection between humans and the wild. And though she never saw Bella and her cubs again, Emily carried their story with her, a quiet testament to the power of trust, resilience, and the extraordinary bonds that can form when we open our hearts to the unexpected. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and if you've watched this far, comment "I watched this far" and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that pops up on the end screen. It's really exciting.